President. Do you hear what I hear? Before the prancing and pawing of each little hoof of Santa's 8 tiny reindeer will be heard on the roof, there's a joyful sound that denotes the coming of the Yuletide season in just a few instantly recognizable notes. Of course, I am talking about Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas Is You. While it's become a holiday classic, the song is taking on a whole new meaning this season. If, like Mariah, you don't want a lot for Christmas and don't care about the presents underneath the Christmas tree, this may be your year. That's because Bidenomics is causing everything to be back-ordered, delayed, unavailable, or just plain unaffordable. Even Christmas trees are in short supply. So don't be surprised if your only option to deck the halls this year looks like Charlie Brown's sad little twig of a fir tree branch. Whether shopping at a store or online, we are all experiencing it. With the cost of gifts up 20% and consumer prices surging to the highest level in over 30 years, you are paying a whole lot more for a whole lot less. That is, if you can even find what you are looking for. Perhaps the most telling sign of the times, the Dollar Tree, which had to discontinue selling some of its popular products due to cost constraints, is raising prices to $1.25. President Biden's contribution to this year's season of giving could best be summed up by an elf on an empty shelf. After all, the Biden administration has ignored, dismissed, and even contributed to the conditions causing these economic hardships. Speaking at the White House just last week, the president actually claimed his efforts have resulted in, quote, shelves across the country being well stocked, end quote. That may be true at his White House gift shop, but not in the stores in Iowa and across the country. The supply chain problem is such a mess, not even Rudolph with his nose so bright can guide all of the barges stuck at sea into port by Christmas night. The Democrats' out-of-control spending spree and misguided economic policies, like paying people not to work for most of the year, have decreased both the availability of goods as well as the value of the money in your wallet. For folks in Iowa and the rest of the nation who are working longer hours due to labor shortages or just to keep up with the skyrocketing prices, this has created a real-life nightmare before Christmas. As a result, a record number of Americans say they won't be buying gifts this year. But rather than addressing these concerns, bare shelves Biden is pushing his so-called Build Back Better Act, which itself is a Christmas tree bill adorned with something for every left-wing special interest group and topped off with a massive $300 billion tax break for coastal elites. For those millionaires on their wish list who literally have everything, D.C. Democrats are wrapping up a generous tax cut worth nearly $17,000. To no one's surprise, those benefiting the most from this tax giveaway live in or around the San Francisco congressional district represented by Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and the state of New York, home of the Senate Majority Leader. It's a lot like a plot twist to Charles Dickens' classic, A Christmas Carol. But instead of learning to embrace the giving spirit of Christmas, Scrooge receives a tax handout paid for out of the pockets of essential workers struggling to provide for their own families. What a bunch of humbug. Santa Claus, I don't know if you are listening, but if you are, when you're making your list and checking it twice, remember that President Biden promised taxpayers that his Build Back Better plan costs $0, doesn't waste any money on tax breaks for the wealthy, and adds, you guessed it, $0 to the national debt. To no one's surprise, that promise ended up being a lot of malarkey. The truth is, the Biden bill costs $1.7 trillion, adds $367 billion to our debt, and gives a huge tax cut to millionaires. While the president certainly deserves a stocking full of coal for breaking his promises to taxpayers, even coal is in short supply at the moment, and the price has soared to the highest level in more than 12 years. Other energy prices, whether to warm your home or fill up the gas tank of your car, are also up sharply. The president has done his part to limit fuel supplies by signing executive orders to further restrict access to oil and gas. After enduring nearly 2 years of making sacrifices, folks should not have to now choose between heating their house, buying food for their families, or putting gifts under the tree. So rather than passing another one of President Biden's budget-busting bills, the best gift that Washington can give taxpayers is to keep this from being a blue Christmas and simply stop making matters worse. Folks who have worked hard all year desperately deserve a break from the economic pressures being caused by Bidenomics so they can enjoy some time with their families. And unlike last Christmas, we can once again rediscover the true meaning of this holiday season by spending time with those we love the most, just like Mariah sings about. Make my wish come true. All I want for Christmas is you. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Iowa is recognized.
Well, following on the Christmas season message that we just heard, this season is around the corner, and Democrats are scrambling very, very hard to deliver on their liberal wish list before the end of the year. And that's not a Christmas list that people, or an agenda that people are going to accept very well, from what I've heard about the opposition to the trillions of dollars that they're trying to spend. This grab bag of long-sought new government programs is a top priority for Washington Democrats. Meanwhile, the bigger concern that I hear around Iowa is rising prices on everything from gas to food to home goods. Americans doing their holiday shopping this year are finding items out of stock, and when in stock, paying far more for less. Even the Christmas tree is no exception. Christmas tree prices are up 30%. Overall, consumer prices were up 6 2/10% on an annual basis in the month of October, a 31-year high. Economists polled by the Wall Street Journal expect November inflation to shoot up to 6.7. Even some analysts are saying that it could be closer to 7%. Americans are experiencing the highest inflation in a generation. The last thing they need for Christmas is another Democrat spending boondoggle, further fanning the flames of inflation. They ought to listen to their own Democrat economists. Larry Summers, former Secretary of Treasury in the Clinton administration, Council of Economic Advisors in the Obama administration, warning us in January, again in April, again in August, again in October, I saw on television. They're pouring fires on the fires of gasoline on the fires of inflation. Unfortunately, unless our voices of reason within the Democratic Party prevail, that's exactly what they're going to get: more inflation. Democrats say there's nothing to worry about because, to quote Treasury Secretary Yellen, their bill is fully paid for. We know that's not true, but even the Washington Post isn't buying Yellen's statement, and they said that by awarding Secretary two Pinocchios for her comment. The reality is Democrats pull every budget trick in the book in an attempt to cloak the reckless tax and spending spree with the illusion of fiscal responsibility. However, even their budget sleight of hands failed to mask the upfront inflationary pressures embedded in that very bill. According to the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, CBO as we call it around here, their bill contains hundreds of billions of dollars in deficit spending in each of the first 5 years. That means that regardless of what Democrats say, their bill will add to inflation pressures now when it matters most. Under honest assumptions, the deficit spending never stops. According to Penn Wharton budget model, their analysis, if their spending proposals are permanent as they intend, their plan would increase debt and deficits by more than $2 trillion over 10 years. As a result, by 2050, government debt would be 24% higher, economic growth would be 3% higher, and wages of the middle class would be 1 7/10% less than they would otherwise be. Now, they go by the bill Building Back Better. Sounds to me like all of this is building back worse. So I urge my Democrat colleagues to pursue and rethink the approach. Securing a new near-term ideological win is not worth the risk of spurring unchecked inflation, sapping the value of America's hard-earned dollars. I yield.
Madam President.
Minority Whip is recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, one thing that you can say for the Democrats' so-called Build Back Better plan is that it provides a never-ending supply of bad proposals to talk about. And the bad Build Back Better measure I want to discuss today is Democrats' plan to double the size of the IRS. Yes, double the size of the IRS. Madam President, the IRS is not exactly the most popular government agency, and with good reason. The agency has gained for itself a reputation for poor taxpayer service and, most seriously, for mishandling the confidential information, taxpayer information it has access to. In fact, the IRS was subject to a massive leak or hack of private taxpayer information mere months ago, information that somehow ended up in the hands of advocates at ProPublica. And neither Treasury nor the IRS has provided meaningful follow-up about the data breach, much less any accountability. For months, Republicans on the Senate Finance Committee have pressed the administration for details about the breach of private taxpayer information. I would have hoped by now that my friends on the other side of the aisle would have shown similar concern for the privacy of the American taxpayer. And who could forget the IRS scandal during the Obama administration when the IRS targeted a number of organizations based on their political beliefs? Madam President, those are two notorious examples of IRS misconduct, but there are plenty of others. The Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration has repeatedly found instances of IRS agents violating taxpayer rights. And then there's the agency's record of irresponsibility or incompetence or both, losing track of laptops that may have contained sensitive taxpayer information, rehiring employees who had been fired for bad behavior, work delays due to a lack of simple printer maintenance, hanging up on taxpayers who call the IRS for information. Customer service departments in general can be frustrating, but at least at many companies you can reach an actual person in a fairly reasonable amount of time. If you call the IRS, you have a 1 in 50 chance of reaching a human being. 1 in 50. Well, Madam President, I could go on, but suffice it to say that there are good reasons why Americans tend not to be big fans of the IRS, and why they think this agency already has too much power. But Democrats would like to double the size of the agency. Democrats' bill would add 87,000 new IRS employees. 87,000, Madam President. That's enough employees to fill an entire football stadium with some left over. 87,000 is more than the population of Rapid City, South Dakota, the second largest city in my home state. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that increasing the size of the agency in this way would result in significantly higher audit rates of American taxpayers. Many of those audits would hit middle-income taxpayers and small businesses. In other words, individuals without easy access to an army of accountants to help them navigate the process and ensure that their rights are protected. Madam President, Democrats' primary reason for the IRS expansion is to raise revenue, to help pay for their partisan tax and spending spree. They claim that hiring all of these new IRS agents and employees will allow them to close or reduce the tax gap, the difference between taxes owed and taxes paid. But there are a couple of problems with that. In the first place, it's extremely doubtful that they will be able to raise the money they claim because that they'll be able to raise. In fact, the Congressional Budget Office doesn't even score hope-for revenue from enforcement since it considers the acquisition of that revenue to be so uncertain. And even if Democrats are able to raise a meaningful sum from increased enforcement, what exactly is it going to cost Americans for Democrats to recapture this money? Increased scrutiny and costly audits of law-abiding taxpayers, IRS intimidation and harassment. And just in case anyone thinks I'm exaggerating about that intimidation, I would note that a provision in the House version of Democrats' reckless tax and spending spree would repeal a measure requiring written approval of a supervisor before an IRS agent can access, or can assess any penalties. The provision was intended to prevent overreaching IRS agents from threatening Americans with unjustified penalties. And it's hard to imagine why Democrats are trying to repeal this measure if they're not trying to pave the way for much more aggressive IRS pressure and enforcement. And I haven't even mentioned the provision that was in Democrats' proposal for a long time, in which some Democrats, including the President's Treasury Secretary and other administration officials, would still like to see included. And that's a provision that would empower the IRS to snoop on the details of Americans' bank accounts. Under one version of this provision, the IRS would be able to sift through the bank records of any American with just $600 in annual transactions. In other words, the IRS would be able to look through the bank records of just about every American and find out just how much you spent on Starbucks or your last doctor's bill or that new winter coat. It's staggering. The Democrats could even contemplate giving that much power to an agency that has a track record of mishandling sensitive taxpayer information. But that's the kind of power the President's Treasury Secretary, for one, would like this agency to have. Madam President, with their so-called Build Back Better plan, Democrats are proposing a massive expansion of government. And we're apparently just supposed to take it on faith that the government will be able to handle all these new responsibilities. Well, I have to say, and I would say many other Americans, have my doubts. And the IRS provides a perfect example of why. The IRS can't even properly handle the staff and responsibilities it already has. And yet, Democrats think it's a good idea to double the size of this agency and give it new enforcement powers, and if some have their way, expanded access to Americans' personal information. Madam President, doubling the size of the IRS is a terrible idea. And it's one more reason why Build Back Better is a bad deal for the American people. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Madam President,
Senator from Utah is recognized.
when the Grinch stole Christmas, it was a relatively simple operation, one that required a relatively simple solution. Unfortunately, cold, unfeeling regulations and entrenched bureaucracies do not have undersized hearts, hearts that can somehow grow 3 sizes. Protectionist laws and labor shortages do not warm to holiday cheer. The COVID-19 pandemic has caused our already deeply troubled economy problems, and it's caused our already deeply troubled supply chain to become mired with challenges of all sorts, including truck driver shortages, outdated port technology, lack of container storage capacity, port labor difficulties, and scarce freight equipment. In fact, as situations become more dire with the supply chain crisis, with inflation and with shortages all over the country, our own regulations do a whole lot to delay and disrupt solutions that we need the most at the time we most need them. Americans are feeling the pain of skyrocketing prices, of shipping delays and empty shelves as our laws and bureaucracies fail to respond to shipping backlogs and labor shortages. The system just is not working, and President Biden's press release policies have not fixed it. In fact, they've made it much, much worse. Like so many problems during his presidency, President Biden is not touching them with a 39.5-foot pole. As the holidays are here, we see the problems continuing to mount. And these problems needed solutions many, many months ago. But there is still hope. My Stop the Grinch Act can help us fix the supply chain crisis and save Christmas. This is a bill that focuses on the problems that are actually slowing down our supply chain. And it's a bill that, if enacted, would get products off of ships, onto trucks, and into stores so that people in Utah and across the nation could get the things they need for everyday life and especially for Christmas. By suspending a number of federal restrictions on ports, on ships, and on trucks, we can help clear the backlog at our ports, get products onto shelves, and get the presents under the trees. The bill will help solve our truck driver shortage by temporarily lowering the commercial driver license age to 18 for interstate travel. And it would waive for 1 year the hours of service requirements, specifically for those involved in transporting containers into and out of ports. The bill would allow for more ships to move more freely and to move cargo between American ports by waiving the Jones Act. And it would also allow for federal land that's been designated as appropriate for multiple use to be used to temporarily store cargo containers. And that would do a lot in and of itself to help us break our pork log jams. The combination of these things would do so masterfully. And finally, my bill would help ease the lack of freight equipment by allowing excess Department of Defense equipment to be used to help move cargo. A lot of our problems can be traced to a lack of available truck chassis. And if we open up those that are deemed excess, we can do a lot to move freight. While this bill doesn't address every challenge with our supply chain, it does provide tangible solutions that, if enacted into law, would solve real problems right now. Look, we can end this nightmare before Christmas. We can stop the Grinch, save our holidays, and secure our economy. My Stop the Grinch Act is the start to a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President.
Senator from Florida is recognized.
Madam President, we're less than 3 weeks away from Christmas, and Joe Biden has run this country into the ground. I know President Biden thinks that Santa can solve his problems, but our supply chain is such a mess, not even Santa Claus, with all of his Christmas magic, can fix it. There are nearly 100 ships waiting to dock in California ports. About 40 of them are a few miles off the coast, while more than 50 are holding back further in the Pacific. It looks to me like the Biden administration didn't like the visual. I recently received a letter from my grandmother in New Smyrna Beach, Florida. She's retired now, but was a small business owner who has spent her life working hard to support her kids and grandkids. I have the letter with me. In her letter, she writes, "I'm worried about inflation. I see prices of fuel, groceries, and staples going through the roof. I see the American standard of life declining. It's getting harder and harder for families to make ends meet, buy a home, afford medical care, and higher education for their children." She also tells me that Joe Biden's unconstitutional vaccine mandate is putting her husband at risk of losing his job, despite the fact that he worked throughout the pandemic as an essential worker. She's not alone. She shares the exact same concerns as millions of Americans and businesses right now that are reeling from the impacts of Biden's socialism. The pantry of Broward County, Florida, usually supplies meals to 500 families each month. But they weren't able to donate as many Thanksgiving turkeys this year because of skyrocketing prices. And there are other terrible stories in the news across my state every day. I heard about a single father of 3 in Clearwater, Florida, who lost his job due to COVID. And his new job, he's having to stretch each dollar as far as he can possibly go, as prices for meat, food, rent, everything goes up and up and up. I heard about a woman who delivers groceries in South Miami. She's seeing prices going up and is having to send pictures of empty shelves to her online customers to show grocery stores are out of so many products. She can hardly ever find any juice boxes for her own children. These are the stories of real Floridians, and I could keep going because Florida families and families all across our great country are struggling as Biden's inflation and supply chain crisis rages on. Now, most people, when they're in charge, they want to do something positive when a problem arises. When the families are struggling, leaders should want to solve a problem. What's shocking is that even as ships wait in docks, in ports wait to dock in ports, and families are forced to count their pennies and sometimes even go without certain products, the Biden administration is doing absolutely nothing. Secretary Raimondo and Secretary Buttigieg would rather play TV commentator than actually travel to California and solve some of these problems facing our distributors. Instead of coming to the Senate Commerce Committee to testify about what actions they're actually taking, they'd rather stay silent. If they want to show up and do the job they signed up for, I heard there's an opening at CNN. Energy prices are up, and families who are simply trying to stay warm during the winter season are going to face higher bills, just as gas prices and food prices continue to climb. The American people are fed up with President Biden's utter lack of leadership. Time and time again, I've come to the floor to try to get some information about this crisis, but Senate Democrats have stood in the way. When it came down to demand notes from internal meetings the Biden administration held about the signs of inflation they were seeing, Democrats blocked it. When I walked down here to request a report about the factors causing energy prices to rise, Senate Democrats blocked it. When I came down here to pass bicameral, common-sense legislation that will alleviate the supply chain crisis facing our ports, Senate Democrats blocked it. Madam President, this isn't how Washington should be working. I came here to make Washington work for Florida families, but Democrats in this body are joining hands with the White House to institute policies that make life more difficult and more expensive. This isn't government for the people. This is big government that hurts the people. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Indiana is recognized.
Madam President, in case anyone was wondering, there are 16 days left before Christmas. 16 shopping days. Now, I know I still have some shopping to do, and I look forward to that. But it seems as though some of my colleagues have a jump on me. It seems as though President Biden has a jump on me, and that's good thinking. Because this year, you can't start too early with the supply chain as bad as it is and the price of presents rising. So why don't we gather around the Christmas tree to see what gifts National Democrats are prepared to pass out on Christmas morning thanks to their reckless tax and spending spree. To the left-wing labor unions, what do they offer? Democrats are gifting billions of dollars in handouts to strengthen this core constituency of theirs. While they're letting charitable tax deductions expire in Build Back Better, they've gift-wrapped an above-the-line tax deduction for union dues. Let's see what we have here. Well, that's a car. That's a car. And this is the labor union present. It's a special Christmas surprise. It seems that the Democrats have put under the tree a shiny new tax credit for electric vehicles, but only if those vehicles are made in a union shop. Only a union shop. You see, if you're naughty and you buy an electric vehicle from a non-union shop, like those that are made in my state of Indiana, you'll miss out on the Democrats' $4,500 holiday giveaway in this bill. Apparently, during the Christmas season, the impact of electric vehicles on climate change only matters if the workers' contracts are collectively bargained. Which brings us to another gift we have. That's China. China has a gift under the tree. Why don't we just open this China gift? Well, that's a lot of money. The tax hikes on businesses large and small in this bill will give China an unfair competitive advantage. Increase taxes on American employers by more than $800 billion when they're already struggling with supply chain issues and worker shortages. This is going to do very little to bring jobs back home, jobs of the future to here in the United States of America, which is exactly why the Chinese Communist Party and all of its leaders will love this very expensive gift. And the largest gift under the Washington Democrats' tree goes to, could that be? It says the rich. I'm going to see what's in there. Well, this must mean, it says SALT, by dramatically increasing the cap on the state and local tax deduction, or what's known around here as SALT for short, the once proud party of the working class is giving a tax cut to 2/3 of people earning more than $1 million a year. Now, the average size of that tax cut is almost $17,000 a year for millionaires. This is the new Democratic Party. Merry Christmas. This is the single most expensive tax expenditure in the Build Back Better Act. And it's the second biggest component of the entire bill. So evidently, the national Democrats believe it's better to give than to receive from millionaires. So they proposed a tax cut for the wealthiest Americans from the wealthiest cities in the wealthiest states, gift-wrapped from the Democratic Party. So after the handouts and the giveaways and the entitlements and the earmarks, what's left for regular middle-class working stiffs? Well, we know that the really big gifts come in smallest packages, so I see a stocking here. It says taxpayers on it. Let me see what's in there. Oh, my word. That looks like coal. A lump of coal. Well, that lump of coal must represent the massive $367 billion that will be added to the debt by the Democrats' reckless tax and spending bill, according to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. Not to mention the 10 years of tax increases included in the bill to pay for only a few years of policy changes. Of course, we all know that figure is going to be much higher in reality. If all the temporary provisions in this bill are made permanent, it will increase our budget deficit by nearly $3 trillion this decade. It seems the Democrats want our children and grandchildren to pay for this bundle of goodies through the layaway plan. GDP is expected to fall because of Build Back Better. The cost of living is expected to rise even more because of Build Back Better. And despite the promises of President Biden and my Senate Democratic colleagues, but despite their votes right here on this floor, if Build Back Better were to become law, taxes would be raised on lower and middle-class Americans who are just trying to get by this Christmas season. Ho, ho, ho. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, this Christmas season, Democrats are not offering holiday jobs or good cheer. Instead, this feels more like the nightmare before Christmas. Colleagues, the best present all of us can give the American people is to do whatever is in our power to stop the Build Back Better Act.
Madam President.
Senator from Ohio is recognized.
President, I appreciate the comments of my colleague from Indiana. One thing he didn't have under that Christmas tree or in the stocking was a lump of coal, because I guess the lump of coal is not something we'd find in the Build Back Better, even though there's a lot of stuff in there that is really bad for our economy right now, bad for our families, bad for our workers. And when you think about it, right now we're at a time of high inflation, supply chain difficulties, record levels of debt and deficit, and an uncertain economy due largely to the uncertainty regarding COVID, and particularly this new variant, the Omicron. So this is not a time for us to be putting forth a massive new spending bill and a massive new tax increase on the American economy. In fact, it's a time for us to retrench a little bit and try to help to get back to where we were before COVID-19. Remember, that was a time when, after the 2017 tax reforms, we had a great economy by any measure, and it was an opportunity economy, the lowest poverty rate in the history of our country since we started keeping track in the 1950s. As of February, just before going into the COVID-19 period, February 2020, we had 19 straight months of wage gains of over 3%. By the way, that was over inflation because inflation was so low. So people were feeling it. They were actually getting a wage increase. And in my state of Ohio, that was the first time in probably a decade and a half. Now it's just the opposite. Wages are actually down when you take inflation into account. And inflation is high, as everyone feared, because we've dumped so much on the demand side of the economy, and the supply side is restricted, in part because of what's happening with COVID, and it creates this inflation. This was warned by not just Republicans like myself, but back in March, when President Biden and Democrats put $1.9 trillion into this economy, the most ever, the biggest bill ever, it was Larry Summers, former Secretary of the Treasury under President Clinton, NEC, National Economic Council chair under President Obama, who said, you know, this is going to stoke inflation. It's going to overheat the economy. It's exactly what it did. So we have this high inflation. We have this record levels of debt and deficit. We're talking about extending the debt limit right now, and people think the number is going to be, just to extend it for about a year, over $2 trillion, meaning that we're spending so much more than we're taking in. And yet there's this discussion that somehow before Christmas, we're going to put forward this Build Back Better legislation that was just talked about. It's not building back America better. Unfortunately, it's building us worse off than we were, and adding to inflation, adding to the supply chain difficulties, adding to the debt and deficits at record levels, and certainly doing nothing with regard to COVID-19. So why would we do this? And certainly, why would we do this now? It makes no sense. Well, because I guess there was a promise made. that we're going to have this massive new spending and this massive new tax increases. So what's in there? Well, on the spending side, when you look at it, it is the largest spending bill ever put forward by the U.S. Congress, unless you believe that it's really only $1.7 trillion instead of 2 or 3 times that. And in that case, it's the second biggest ever. But the analysis I've seen from the Penn Wharton study, from the Committee for Responsible Budget, from others who said, you know, there are a lot of sunsets in there. As an example, the child tax credit lasts for 1 year. Does anybody believe it only lasts for 1 year? That wouldn't be the history of this place. So it will continue. So these sunsets are not going to be effective, so that the spending will continue to increase. The tax increases don't cover them, so there'll be a big gap in terms of the deficit, and the projections are it's more like $4.5 trillion in spending. So the largest spending increase in the history of our country by far. We're talking about doing this, again, at a time when already we have record levels of debt and deficit and high inflation, and driven by COVID, a lot of uncertainty in our economy. On the tax side, I could argue it's even worse because the tax increases are going to be hard on workers because they're taxes on businesses. What the Joint Committee on Taxation says, which is the nonpartisan group here in Congress that advises us, what CBO says, Congressional Budget Office says, what other outside groups say is the same thing, which is when you tax these businesses, who gets taxed? Well, it's workers. Lower wages, lower benefits. 70% of the benefit of our tax cuts in 2017 went to workers. 70% of this increase in taxes would be coming out of workers' pockets. So it's a bad idea. But let's look a little deeper at what these taxes actually are. There is a 15% minimum tax, a new alternative minimum tax, which is always complicated for everybody to figure out what that is. But in this case, it's called the book tax. Now, I don't know if this was on purpose or not. I assume it wasn't. But the books tax, as you apply it to our economy, will result in real damage to things that most people think are important, like defined benefit plans, pension plans. Democrats and Republicans alike have supported defined benefit plans. I support them. Unfortunately, there aren't as many as there used to be. But there'll be even fewer if this passes. Why? Because when you calculate your taxes under the book tax, you now have to take into account whatever your asset increase is in your pension. And if you are one of these companies caught up in this, you could well find yourself in a situation where, for the first time ever, you get no deduction for your contribution to your pension. Why would we do that? And then you're taxed on the asset increase, which may be caused by higher interest rates, may be caused by the market going up, but you get no benefit in your company. And your profits in your company may not be enough to pay those taxes. Here's an example of this. There are some companies who have figured out this problem. By the way, there's some unions figuring it out too, because a lot of union workers are caught up in this as well because they have defined benefit plans typically. The company's thinking, okay, if I make $100 million in profit, and if I have a $2 billion or $1 billion increase in my pension assets, and you apply a 15% tax to that, I'm not going to have enough money to pay my taxes. So what are they going to do? Well, they could declare bankruptcy. They could get a loan, which again hurts workers. So that's, I hope, an inadvertent part of this, but that's in this legislation. Why would we want to hurt defined benefit plans? I think it was an effort to say we're going to raise taxes, but we're going to do it in a sort of convoluted way so it doesn't look like we're really raising taxes. But it's real taxes, and it's going to hurt, again, workers in America. Another thing it would disqualify companies from doing is taking what's called bonus depreciation. All of us, I thought, were kind of supportive of that. In 2017, that tax bill, this was put in place where you can immediately write off expansion of plant and equipment. Retailers love it. Restaurants love it. But so do manufacturers, and they use it a lot. And those manufacturers are telling me, okay, now under the book tax, you have to go back to the regular depreciation. So you're not writing things off that first year, as you can now under bonus depreciation. Why would you want to do that right now? Again, with all the economic uncertainty out there, with COVID, with the inflation fears. We want to encourage people to expand plant and equipment, and there's a lot of people hesitating. That's in this legislation. And now let's talk quickly about the SALT provisions. We already know what that is because it's gotten a lot of play, but the state and local tax deduction means that in states like mine, Ohio, we're subsidizing high tax states. So if you're from Missouri, as Senator Blunt's here on the floor, if you're from Ohio, by having a deduction for your state and local taxes at the federal level, You're not only encouraging those states to continue to have high taxes and even have further taxes because you're being subsidized by federal taxpayers, but it's unfair to those states that have done the responsible thing and tried to keep taxes under control. But in this legislation, Democrats say, no, we're going to increase this cap from $10,000 to $80,000 a year. In other words, provide more help to the SALT beneficiaries. Guess what? There's an analysis out this week that says almost none of that benefit goes to Americans who are not in the top 10% of wage earners. Almost none of that benefit that's in this bill goes to people not in the top 10%. $285 billion is devoted to this, $100 billion more than is devoted to the cornerstone social safety net program, the child care credit in this bill. Over $100 billion more for this. So how does this all shake out in terms of who it's helping, who it's hurting? Well, here's what the numbers are. And this is, again, Joint Tax Committee, folks who are nonpartisan looking at this. Almost 70% of people who make $1 million or more a year are going to get a significant tax cut because of this legislation. Think about that. It's about 68% plus are going to get a significant tax cut if you make $1 million a year. So if you're a millionaire, you're going to do very well. If you make between $500,000 and $1 million a year, 90% are going to get a tax cut under this legislation. But if you make $30,000 a year, only 30% of people who make $30,000 a year are going to get tax relief under this legislation. And that's just in the first year. In the second year, it goes down below 30% to 12%. In the third year, 10%, and then it goes down to single digits. So the benefit is heavily skewed toward higher income Americans. Why would we do that? It just makes no sense. Are we worried about millionaires? But that's in this legislation. So again, I would say, Build Back Better? I don't think so. We were building pretty well when we had the lowest poverty rate in the history of our country, when we had the lowest unemployment rate ever for blacks, Hispanics, the disabled, when we had 50-year lows in unemployment overall in our economy, when we had a situation where wages were going up, again, 19 straight months of 3% or more wage gains. It was real wage gains above inflation. Let's get back to that. That's how you grow the opportunity economy. That's how you give people a chance. That's how you help everybody. But let's not do this massive new spending bill to cause more inflation, massive new tax increases. It's going to hurt the economy and hurt workers, especially coming into the holiday season. Let's instead do something that gives the American people a gift that they deserve. I yield back my time.